The oil market is down 4% today in reaction to this news that OPEC is going to be pushing its meeting 4 days down the line. And this comes after we saw the ceasefire in Israel with the Palestine conflict get announced. And obviously, that's a 4 day ceasefire. So these two events are extremely correlated. OPEC didn't just magically push its meeting by 4 days. They didn't just think of that number. It was based on the ceasefire, and it's all in reaction to the ceasefire. So you really need to know what's going to be happening in the oil market over the next couple of weeks, because it's going to be drastic, and we're going to probably see a bunch of volatility within oil. What I'll do in this video is I'll give you my thesis on what's going on in the oil market, and at the end of the video, I will give you a price prediction for oil. But with that being said, let's just talk about it. So let's talk about it start to finish here. So there was a ceasefire announced yesterday, 4 day ceasefire. And today, OPEC comes out, they push their OPEC meeting 4 days. So on the 25th, the ceasefire will be over. And the original meeting date was the 26th. So if OPEC were to meet on the 26th, they really wouldn't know what the effects of the ceasefire would be over the coming days. So what I mean by that is if OPEC were to meet on the 26th, which was the original meeting date, they would only get to see 1 day of what that is like when the ceasefire is done, right? Because no one knows what's going to happen once the ceasefire is over. So OPEC moved out 4 days to further understand what's going to happen in Palestine after the ceasefire. So they moved to basically have a couple days leeway to see the effects of the ceasefire stopping, right? What's going to happen in Hamas? What is going to happen in Palestine, excuse me. So that is why they moved the meeting. And you may be thinking, why would they care so much what's going on in that region? Well, you got to realize who is OPEC. OPEC is a bunch of non-friendly U.S. countries, and they're very non-friendly, and they want to hurt the West. So if they see America, kind of being super involved in this war, they're going to try to hurt the Americans, the West, however they can, and they would really do that by increasing oil prices. So given OPEC is such a huge chunk of the oil supply, so we have about 40%. Let me just, I can show you this. So we have about 40% of the oil supply comes from OPEC, and then another roughly, 10, 15% comes from OPEC plus. We get, and OPEC plus is just kind of some other countries that basically do what OPEC says. Russia's the largest OPEC plus country. Mexico's number 2. So they're going to do what OPEC tells them. So they have almost 60, really I should say 55, 60% of the oil supply in OPEC countries. So that kind of tells you that these organizations, OPEC and OPEC plus, they have a massive amount of sway on the oil markets just based on the supply standpoint. So they can basically move oil wherever they want. If they want oil to go higher, they can do it. And it would really hurt the West because we have an inflation problem, right? If you increase oil prices, inflation is going to go up, and that's going to be bad for the U.S. So it will also be really bad for European countries, which don't have a ton of oil supply. Therefore, they get most of their oil from the United States. So it's really more of, this is almost geopolitics more than it is adequately supplying the oil market with supply based on demand. It's really just politics at this point in time. And when I say OPEC is unfriendly to the United States, let's just look at the countries that are in OPEC. So we have Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Indonesia, Libya, United Arab Emirates, Nigeria, Ecuador, and obviously Russia's in OPEC plus. So these are all countries that don't like the United States. They want to hurt the West. So they're basically, looking at this conflict in Israel and saying, all right, if this conflict is going to continue to roar on, if the United States is going to continue to get involved, well, we're going to raise the oil prices and hurt you. That's basically what they're trying to do. That's why they moved out this meeting, to see how this war actually progresses once the ceasefire is over. So that is kind of why they've done it. That's why we're seeing oil markets move lower today, is really because they could really drop down their supply of oil, which is almost projected at this point in time. So we can see here that this shows me the just one country, Saudi Arabia, which is really the biggest here. So their crude oil production and how it affects oil prices. So we can see that when in about 2018, 2019, 2020, when they were drastically cutting their oil supply, we saw oil prices move drastically lower. And over the past couple years, where they've been increasing production, we've seen oil prices start to move lower. And then just recently, we've seen a drop in production. And now that it's been slight, but now that we see that drop in production, I believe we see oil prices spike up. So obviously this is one country and it's not the end all be all, but if you consider OPEC and you consider that it's almost 55, 60% of global oil supply, if OPEC were to drop its output drastically, that's likely going to lead to a big spike in prices. So my prediction is OPEC likely raises oil price, or like cuts output, which would in turn raise oil prices. So I think that's what happens at this meeting on the 30th. So the 30th, being next Thursday. So next week, I expect the oil markets to see somewhat of a bump just based on OPEC's activity. And then with that being said, let's take a look at oil's chart and give a price prediction. So we rejected the $78 level, which is where oil had topped out over the past 3 trading days. It's roughly where oil topped out last week as well. It's where oil had found support in August. Past support acts as new resistance. And this level also coincides with the 200-day moving average. Therefore, it was very logical for us to assume that we could get a drop. We got that drop. And the next major level of support for oil is at around $72.50, which is where oil had bottomed out in Thursday and Friday's trading session of last week. Therefore, I believe we bottom out at around 72.5 for oil, and we see a move higher over the coming trading days for oil. I think we probably get a nice move back up to the $78 level. Oil has been somewhat range bound in between the $78 level and the $72 support level. I believe we see oil continue to be somewhat range bound until we get some clarity from that meeting. Output drop, then I expect we could probably see oil move up to about $82 pretty quickly. So that's kind of what I'm predicting for OPEC, is that they use oil as kind of their way of hurting the West, kind of their way of influencing this war is through oil production. So they're likely going to drop off oil production, which would lead to a rise in oil prices. So that is kind of how these two situations are intertwined. No, OPEC did not push back their meeting by 4 days on accident. They did it in reaction to this ceasefire of 4 days. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you here next time.